Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Tech Can Save Us podcast brought to you by Literal Humans. As always, I'm Paul David, founder and CEO of Literal Humans, and we're joined today by Tessa Clarke, co-founder and CEO of Olio. We're going to talk about tackling waste in our homes and communities. Welcome to the pod, Tessa.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great to have you on. I'm really excited to have Tessa on today, y'all, because Olio is doing some really great work in the community. It's a free app on a mission to tackle waste in our homes and local communities by connecting people who have surplus food and household items with neighbors who need them. And you can tell they're doing the good work because I hear about you all in the community, like friends who have different things. And
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, you've got the best marketing strategy, which is word of mouth to this day.
Good.
Still the best.
Yeah, 100%.
By way of background, since launching in 2015, Olio has grown to over 8 million users who have together shared more than 130 million meals and prevented 300,000 tons of CO2 emissions and rehomed 15 million household items. Those are some really impressive statistics. Before founding Olio, Tessa built an impressive career across strategy consulting, e-commerce, and media with senior roles at small outfits you might have heard of like Boston Consulting Group, Dyson, and EMAP. But it was her upbringing on a farm where her mother's words, waste not, want not, rang in her ears, combined with witnessing waste everywhere in the corporate world that ultimately drove Tessa to build Olio and to become part of the solution. All right, Tessa, let's get into it. How was that for an introduction? Did we do okay?
You did very well. Well done.
Cool. So first thing, we like to sort of frame the challenge and the problem that you're addressing for our audience. You know, many folks know that food waste is a massive global problem, yet, you know, it can sometimes feel invisible, you know, to folks. So from a market level perspective, what would you say is fundamentally broken about our relationship with waste today?
I think the biggest problem is that waste has just become completely endemic across our lives, society, and businesses. So anywhere you look, if you sort of open your eyes, unfortunately, you will see waste. And waste has been baked into business models because, unfortunately, we don't price the true costs in terms of the environment and the social impact of waste. And so it is often far more profitable to waste something than to invest in preventing waste. And food waste is one of the biggest tragedies of our time, and you see that sort of happening at scale. So globally, a third of all the food we produce each year gets thrown away, which is worth over $1 trillion. And that has an enormous environmental consequence. And of course, it's even more infuriating because alongside that, there's widespread hunger going on. So we have over 800 million people who go to bed hungry every night. So food waste truly is one of the world's dumbest problems. And it does stem from the fact that waste has become endemic, but also we no longer value food sufficiently. And I think that's part of the problem too.
Yeah. I mean, you started to get at this, you know, this idea that it's endemic and it's become kind of a baked in behavior. So, there's an infrastructure piece to that. There's a, behavior piece to that. How do we start to make that shift? And it sounds like you've done it already, but how do we change hearts and minds about this as a problem that feels so persistent?
So we've definitely got to do the cultural shift, and that's actually the hardest thing. That's why it's been so hard to solve the problem of food waste and why it still persists, is because at its core, it requires behavior change. What gives me hope that behavior change is possible is things like smoking in a car with kids was perfectly normal, as was driving without seatbelts and we didn't used to recycle, all sorts of things. And today, we have become completely anesthetized to food waste. It's almost just become a reflexive habit, something that we don't really stop and think much about. So in order to change that behavior, we've got to really have a collective conversation about the importance of food, the value of food. It needs to start in our schools with educating kids, helping them learn how to grow, because I know this from my own experience. When you spend hours and hours and hours growing something, you sure as heck aren't just going to toss it in the bin. And then another thing that is required to change our collective behavior around food waste is through actually just making it public. And at the moment, businesses, for example, here in the UK, throw away over 2 billion meals worth of perfectly good food every single year. But at the moment, that's taking place behind closed doors. And what we really need to do is we need to expose that. We need to get that out into the open so we can have a collective societal conversation about what we do to solve that problem.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen the show on I think it's BBC, like The Land Between the the land and the seas, I think it's called. You should really watch it, but it's
Yeah.
they have this scene where they kind of take all of the plastic waste that's in the ocean and they drop it onto the land.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's such, I mean, it's just such a great example of sort of art sort of displaying what's happening in real life. And it really moved me and my partner and a lot of friends I know have watched it because it said, hey, like, let's make a physical manifestation of
Yeah.
what we're doing that people are divorced from, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are certain data points that sort of hit people pretty hard. So in terms of sort of visualizing how much food we waste each year in the world, first of all, a landmass larger than China is used every single year to grow food that is never eaten. A quarter of humanity's fresh water is used to grow food that is never eaten. If it were to be a country, food waste would be the third largest source of greenhouse gas emission after the USA and China. And one of my favourites, because this really relates to us in our homes, is that the greenhouse gas emissions from throwing away 1 kilogram of food waste, so let's imagine your kind of food waste caddy in your home, is equivalent to the greenhouse gas emissions from landfilling 25,000 plastic bottles. And I've found that knowledge really helpful. So each time you go to throw something away and think, well, it's just half a head of broccoli. Well, actually, it's having an equivalent environmental impact of throwing several thousand plastic bottles into landfill. Would I do that? No, I would not. So why am I throwing away half a head of broccoli without thinking twice about it?
Yeah. Well, you've obviously done a good job of convincing at least 8 million people to think differently about 130 million meals and 15 million household items. So as we go into talking about your product, I'd love to just understand, like, how did you help initiate and catalyze this behavioral change among these millions of Olio users?
Well, the good news is that whilst waste has become totally endemic, it really is a very, very modern, recent problem. It's a problem that's taken place over the last sort of 50 years or so, and that actually hardwired into each of us human beings is an intense dislike of waste, especially food waste. Because if you think about it, it's like without food, we die. Therefore, it is fairly instinctive to dislike wasting food. And actually, humans are really, really unique amongst all other species in that we share our most precious food. We share our food. And if you speak to social anthropologists, they say that's a really big part as to why the human species has been so successful. So at Olio, what we're doing actually is really tapping into some very primitive behaviors. And one of our core insights with the app was that people don't enjoy throwing away food, but they throw away food because they're no longer connected to their community, because they no longer have someone to give that food to. So if we can create an app that makes it really simple and safe and convenient to give away that surplus food to someone living nearby instead of throwing it away, then hopefully that will be the catalyst for the behavior change that we want to see. And that is exactly what we've done. We've built an app that makes it really simple to give away your spare food rather than throw it away. But just as importantly as making it be simple is making it feel incredibly satisfying. And it's kind of one of those things, you've got to try it to believe it, but it feels really amazing to give something away to someone else, to give something a second life. And our community tell us that they joined Olio because they hate waste, but they keep using Olio, they keep sharing just because it feels really good, and they feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, and they're also directly connecting and building relationships and, in many instances, friendships with their local community.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I mean that this is a big part of the reason we named our company what we did, Literal Humans, and our entire team are trained in behavioral science because it's so much about drilling down into those those psychographics and those those human behaviors and tapping into those. Some of it can be done from the product side, but also you need to kind of connect to real life things, IRL things, as they say. Sounds like you've done that. Let's get into the product. So, for our listeners who might be new to Olio, they haven't joined and connected yet, walk us through how the app works and kind of what differentiates it from other approaches to tackling waste.
So Olio's real USP is connecting neighbours in real life to give away food and household items. And from a product perspective, I really focus on making sure that Olio is trusted, that people show up reliably, and that people are incredibly friendly. So trusted, reliable, and friendly. I think they're kind of our real differentiators. And how the app works is perhaps you are decluttering the kids' playroom, or that toiletries drawer that's full of stuff gathering dust you're never going to use, or maybe you're going away for the weekend, you've got some food you're not going to get around to eating. You just snap a photo of your spare item and add it to the app. People living nearby get an alert. They can then browse the listings, request what they want, and pop round and pick it up. Now, back to the behavioural piece. When most people hear about Olio, the first thing they assume is, will anyone really want X, Y, and Z? And they assume that our big challenge as a business must be demand. Like, how do we get people to pick up food and household items from quote unquote stranger? In reality, actually, we have the opposite challenge. There's no shortage of people who want free food and free household items. So a typical food item that's added to the app is requested within less than half an hour. And a typical household item is requested generally within 4 to 8 hours. Our big challenge is encouraging people to take the 10 or 20 seconds to share something, make it available, give it away via Olio versus throwing it in the bin. So that's what we are constantly working really, really hard on, is to make that process of giving something away as streamlined and delightful and fulfilling as possible. Yeah. So that's the sort of core mechanic. It's neighbour to neighbour, it's in real life. And the real magic is not the app, it's actually that doorstep connection, which can be as brief as a hello and thank you, through to 2/3 of our community tell us that they have made friends through Olio, and 3/4 say that sharing has improved their mental health as well. So the real magic is what takes place on the doorstep. But the other part of Olio is we now have 100,000 food safety trained volunteers who collect unsold food from local businesses, and then they take it home and give it away to their local community via the app. And we came up with a program, it's called the Food Waste Heroes program, in response to a really big conundrum we had in our early days, which was that our early adopters hated food waste, therefore they didn't generate any, therefore they had no food to give away. And we had hoped that local cafes and bakeries and delis would use the Olio app to put on their unsold food at the end of the day, bring extra traffic into the store that they could then cross-sell, upsell. But it turned out they were far too busy running their businesses to be sort of messing around, messaging with neighbours on an app. So in the early days, we were a food sharing app with no food, which I'm sure you'll agree is pretty useless. And we solved that by saying, well, why don't we take the people who have time but no surplus food and match them with the businesses that have surplus food but no time. And so now we have these 100,000 food safety trained volunteers who collect and redistribute unsold food from almost 3,000 Tesco stores, 1,400 Sainsbury's, 1,000 Iceland stores. We also collect and redistribute from 500 school canteens, a whole bunch of hospital canteens, hundreds of TV and film production shoots, which are catered with beautiful food generally. And we also redistribute from a couple of hundred corporate canteens as well.
That's great. I mean, it really too speaks. I love that. Like, we were a food sharing app with no food, and this idea that this problem came up of users avoiding food waste entirely, which then creates another challenge. But I love that it focuses too on we talk a lot about the 4 C's in brand positioning. So really understanding your context, like the macro context, the customer, the category, and the company, and for you, like, we're really refining that customer segment, saying, okay, we need people who they have time and they are producing food waste and they are willing to kind of share it. Like, narrowing that down seemed like it really helped you all to kind of find your product market fit.
Yeah, it did. And we did a lot of very manual, non-digital things in the early days that gave us an incredibly granular understanding of who our early target customer was. So Sasha and I, even before we launched Olio, spent a summer pounding the pavements of North London, giving out free food to anyone who would talk to us, and explained about this new food sharing app that was coming. And through that process of literally just sort of grabbing people on the streets and trying to talk to them, we learned really, really quickly what type of person this resonated with, who it didn't resonate with, the language that worked, the language that didn't work. And honestly, you can't beat that face-to-face interaction. And it's pretty brutal. You've got to develop a thick skin, that's for sure. But that really stood us in good stead for understanding who that early adopter is. Then the important thing is that as you grow and develop, reminding yourself that actually your customer base continues to change and evolve. And so you need to change your marketing activities, your segmentation, your messaging to align with the new and growing customer base.
Yeah. Talk to us as you sort of evolve your customer base. Talk to us about, you have partnerships with major retailers like Tesco and Sainsbury's. And then also, balancing this household to household sharing with the business redistribution side of the platform. Help us understand how that all looks.
So the business to neighbor model really is the flywheel that gets Olio going, because what the business supply does is it brings a large quantity of highly desirable food, food that had a price tag on it half an hour ago in a supermarket or a shopping environment, is now being given away for free via the app. And that brings people into Olio. They see all that delicious free food. They will then go on and request it. They'll then meet on the doorstep and they realize this thing that they thought was kind of weird has actually been going on for years. Millions of people are doing it. It's perfectly normal, kind of fun. And then people tend to go on and reciprocate themselves. Next time, they've thrown a party and they've got too much surplus food, it then just becomes pretty second nature to give it away via Olio and to use it for sort of household declutter as well. So the business supply really is then the flywheel that kickstarts the neighbour to neighbour sharing. And by partnering with national retailers, for example, Tesco they're a very progressive retailer, really doing impressive work around trying to solve their food waste challenges. And we rolled out with them over a couple of months across their whole store portfolio. So that meant that over a couple of months, suddenly Olio was kickstarted in thousands of communities across the country. And that's how we generate revenues as well, through that business side of things. So at the moment, businesses pay waste contractors to take that food off to waste streams, and instead they now pay us, and we make sure that food is eaten instead.
Yeah, amazing. And it's a great segue into, we'd be remiss as a growth consultancy to not ask about your growth strategy. So you've, grown from 0 to 8 million users while building this, incredible community powered model. And that isn't easy. So we'd love to hear, about some of those, scaling and growth challenges, whether it be investors, whether it be products, whether it be, place where you're sort of placing the product, anything. Give us the high level. What has the growth strategy been like from 0 to today?
Well, I'd say the constant challenge has been on the supply side, which is very ironic because there is no shortage of, millions and millions of tons of food are thrown away every year in the UK. So that has always been the challenge. And I should say, actually, 60% of all food waste in the UK takes place in the home. And we have still not succeeded in persuading households to give away their surplus food at scale. Yes, we do have a decent number of people who are doing it, but we certainly haven't captured anywhere near what we should have done of the market. And I think that's just because that behavior change piece is really, really tough. So honestly, I'd say that's been our number one challenge, is just bringing on more supply. The second challenge has been around developing the business model, because everything pretty much that we're doing at Olio has been very much first of a kind. So it's not like we can just pull off the playbook for an HR SaaS company or an e-com company. We have developed the world's first food sharing app that depends on hundreds of thousands of volunteers, real time sort of collecting and redistributing surplus food, and figuring out how to monetize that and price that appropriately has involved a lot of trial and error and experimentation. But in terms of the growth stuff that really has worked for us, I'd say there are a couple of things. First of all, we've got a really strong mission, and we lead with the mission in all of our messaging and communications. And that is very attractive to people, having a strong, positive social and environmental mission. The second thing that has really helped us as a result of that has been word of mouth. So at the moment, we have roughly 70,000 people join Olio each month, and over half of them are coming to us through word of mouth. And the other half are coming through pretty much all organic channels as well. So we have invested very heavily in our ambassador program. So we have about 50,000 ambassadors who we put onto a digital pathway. We give them materials that they can share to spread the word about Olio in their local community. And then we also can send them posters and letters and flyers so they can do hyperlocal guerrilla marketing on our behalf. And then, of course, all of our food waste heroes, our volunteers who are collecting, redistributing food, they're telling all of their friends and family about Olio. Plus, an app that gives out free food, word tends to spread pretty quickly about that. In terms of paid activity, it's been the meta platforms have worked best for us without a shadow of a doubt. We've experimented with pretty much everything that's going, but they have worked really well. So I think, that's probably sort of a good overview.
Yeah, and I guess I'd be curious, what would you say, what's the next horizon in terms of growth and scale for you all? Like, what does that look like?
So the next horizon is, having spent a decade of driving supply, we are now this year switching to focus a lot more on demand, because we have developed a number of new product lines, which means that we have got a lot more free food being given away via the Olio app, but also we now show in the app the yellow sticker food in some supermarkets. And so we're driving our community into stores to buy food when it's in the discounting window. So actually now we are finding ourselves in a situation where we're needing to drive a lot more demand. And so this year we're going to be really focusing on the student community in particular, who, kind of what student doesn't like free food? But also those students are generally up late at night. They're more able to take some of the later volunteering opportunities. So one of our large national retailers has many of their collections at their stores at 10:45 at night. Many people who are not students are not wanting to be out of the house volunteering at that time of night, but students are. So for a whole variety of reasons, sort of focusing on students is a really exciting opportunity for us and really kind of driving demand. And then also this year we are starting to relook at international expansion. So we have an interesting pilot that's going very well in Singapore, and we've got a number of conversations in other markets, and we're looking to replicate, obviously localize, and then replicate the model that we've got here in the UK.
That's great. And we've worked with a number of different companies on international expansion. And I'm glad you used the word localize too, because I think a lot of folks don't think about, I can't just, even if it's in the same language, I can't just drop that verbiage in there, because the meaning is so much different. The cultural implications are different. So it sounds like you're thinking about this pretty thoroughly, pretty intentionally.
Yeah, I think the other major learning on international expansion, we've embarked on international expansion before in the past when we took much more, I would say, a sort of classic tech startup playbook of a land and expand type approach, and go hire a whole bunch of people in a market, which in our experience can be very expensive, very risky, and doesn't always work out. Whereas now we've realized that actually we need to have much more of a surgical approach, and we need to find that sort of flagship retailer in the specific market. And it's about finding the right retailer in the right market. So again, it's one of those things that desk research will only take you so far. And actually now it's about much more leveraging our relationships with veterans in the industry who can help quickly signpost us to the businesses that we should be working with in different markets. So we're quite excited to take that much more focused approach to international expansion, much more resourceful approach.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of traction in the partnership space, and these really sort of high value, sort of almost gatekeeper, partnerships that we're seeing a lot of clients try to create ecosystems to develop. And it sounds like you're taking a similar approach. So that's, I think it's very smart, and probably will save you some money as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. Let's jump in and talk about your background. Our audience loves to hear about your leadership journey. You've worked in consulting, e-commerce at Dyson, senior leadership roles in publishing and retail media at EMAP. Would love to understand how your personal journey has shaped both the idea for Olio and how you've built and grown the company. We'd love to hear about your personal experiences that, and professional experiences that have led you to this moment.
Yeah, so if I had to sort of step back and look at the narrative arc, I would say that I started off my career super high on the IQ and very, very ambitious and perhaps a little unapproachable, very low on the EQ. And life has sort of beaten the crap out of me. I've had lots of feedback along the way. And now I would say I'm a much more balanced leader, a much more open leader. I've stopped being afraid of being who I am and stopped trying to be someone else who I thought was sort of the professional version of myself. And I now show up very, very authentically, and perhaps unsurprisingly, that's a far more effective leadership model than showing up as some sort of professional badass. I would just say I've applied a growth mindset throughout my journey. So I'm constantly watching, listening, learning from others, experimenting, and weaving the things that work into my arsenal and happily abandoning the things that don't work.
Yeah, that's amazing. I also work as an executive coach and a sales coach, and that piece about EQ and IQ and balancing them, especially for founders and leaders, like I've been on that journey as well. I feel like I've gotten my butt kicked and have
Yeah.
learned to, okay, I need to like ramp up the EQ, maybe chill on the IQ and not lead
Yeah.
with a bit more inquiry and empathy than advocacy and,
Yeah.
intensity. So I feel you on that one. Would love to hear about like you left a you had a big high paying job and then you went on to start Olio from scratch. What surprised you the most when you switched from like a big established business to building something entirely new as an entrepreneur?
I've really, really enjoyed it. So I did very well in the corporate environment. But if I look back and I'm honest with myself, I didn't necessarily absolutely love it. I love being sort of master of my own destiny and not having to ask for permission to do stuff. And I guess I like sort of pushing rules and breaking boundaries and rethinking things. So in many ways, the entrepreneurial journey, I guess retrospectively, now looks fairly obvious for me given my personality type. So in the corporate world, you spend a lot of time, or in my experience, I spend a lot of time sort of consensus building, a lot of time asking for permission, and a lot of time doing stuff that wasn't necessarily in the best interest of the business, but some political reason meant that you had to do X, Y, or Z. The great thing about being an entrepreneur is you can kind of rip up all of that and you can do genuinely sort of what is the right thing for the business at the right time. So I have absolutely loved building not just a product, which is very, very fun, but your second product is the company and the culture that you are building. And so being able to take all of the learnings from the corporate world, sort of borrow from the best and improve upon that to the best of our abilities has been really, really fulfilling. So if you've got the right sort of personality type, I cannot recommend the entrepreneurial journey more highly, multiplied by doing work with impact. And that, for me, has just been totally game-changing, life-changing, knowing that every single day what you're doing really matters and is making a difference means that you're incredibly fulfilling. And I know that if I were to sort of die tomorrow, I could be proud of what I've done. Whereas at the end of my corporate career, I can remember thinking if I were to die tomorrow, whilst I had a career that looked great on paper, I wouldn't actually have been proud of what I had done.
Yeah. No, that's a great, I tell people, I think, I have one of the best jobs in the world. I get to be paid, I make an okay salary, but I also get to help amazing organizations that are solving the electric vehicle, challenge and helping sub-Saharan African, communities with entrepreneurship and solving literacy and numeracy challenges in the U.S. education system. And the fact that I get to help them grow is just mind blowing. And I get to make
I
a
want
living.
your job.
It's a
Sounds
it's a good
amazing.
job. And I get to talk to folks like you, so
Yeah.
it's, I'm
Well,
very,
I will say one thing, though, that is challenging about doing that step from the corporate world to the entrepreneurial world that I don't really hear many people talking about, but it's really quite real as a founder, especially if you are starting your entrepreneurial career a little bit later on in life, is that it becomes really challenging in your social circles because suddenly you can no longer afford to do anything that all your friends are inviting you along to do. And your family also has to be kind of on board with the fact that you're not quite, but you're kind of living off of ramen noodles. And that's just, a very, very challenging reality as to how to manage your budget so tightly, because in the early days, basically every pound counts and you need to preserve essentially your capital as long as possible to give you as much runway as possible to increase your probability of success. So it can be really, really challenging for your relationships with your friends and family, just in terms of how you can spend your time with them. And then secondly, multiply that by the fact that you don't have as much time to spend with them either, because you're really focused on trying to set your new venture up for success. So it can be a really, really difficult time, and you need to, or I recommend having those conversations really quite explicitly with your nearest and dearest so that everybody understands that journey that you're going through and what it's going to look like for them.
No, I appreciate that reality check. 'Cause I think sometimes we talk about these journeys and there's a tendency to kind of gloss over like really key challenges
Yeah.
and details like that. Like, hey, you may need to think about how you spend your, the less free time that you'll have,
Yeah.
and select towards other things. So, yeah, it's really interesting. Let's jump into our quick fire questions. This is just kind of like
Yeah,
fun
go for
way
it.
to get to know you a bit more. I want you to just as briefly as you can, a sentence or two,
Yep.
give us the first thing that comes to mind for these questions here. So obviously,
hmm
you're busy with Olio. If you could found another tech company, another tech startup, what would it be and why?
I don't know the exact startup, but it would definitely be in the waste space. The reality is every single industry has somewhere between 10% and 50% wastage. And all of that is going to have to be problem solved away. So I think the waste space is going to be a really exciting space.
Yeah, especially now. I mean, people talk about how every company in over the next few decades kind of needs to be a climate tech company in terms of being
Yeah.
like carbon positive, carbon neutral at least. So yeah, I really appreciate that answer. Let's talk about tech inventions. Which one makes you the most excited and which one makes you the most concerned right now?
Do you know what? This might be a little controversial on this podcast, but I don't tend to get super excited by sort of tech inventions. I'm much more interested in the application of tech. And the obvious sort of elephant in the room right now is AI. Whilst I am sort of super bullish on AI, I get really quite frustrated by what I refer to as the AI utopists who are like, AI is going to solve poverty and AI is going to solve climate change and AI is going to solve this, that, and the other. And that's just not going to happen. If you take poverty as an example, it's like we have all the solutions to poverty. We have all the solutions to give everyone on the planet access to clean running water. And yet collectively we've chosen not to. So I'm much more interested about the intersection of society and technology and what actually happens with that technology.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, it's not controversial because we're called Tech Can't Save Us because we like to walk that line, right? We bring on folks like yourself who are actually using tech and
Yeah.
applied tech to help the world to kind of save it. But we're also skeptical, we're like you.
Yeah.
It really we do think it's that merger of the two, and you have to come with the right intention and the right plan to do it. So
Yeah.
appreciate that answer a lot. Let's talk about humans now. So who is a literal human who has been integral to your career journey that you want to shout out?
So the first person that springs to mind is a lady called Natasha, who I worked with her when I worked at EMAP, which was a FTSE 100 media company. It was my first general management role. So as I said to you, I was kind of super high on the EQ and low on the EQ. Natasha, insanely high on the EQ piece. And it was one of those examples. Often people talk about mentors and assume that they must be someone who's 20 years ahead of you. Actually, I would say that Natasha was a peer mentor, and that to this day, that has been the most valuable mentoring relationship I have had. I learned an enormous amount from Natasha around the whole EQ piece.
Yeah, I feel like peer mentors can sometimes be the most impactful mentors, like, it's because it's a less formal space and they're
Yeah.
going through what you're going through. So I really appreciate that. And then last quick fire question, what is an inspirational quote or saying that has stuck with you in your journey in tech here?
Quite a few. So to pick just one is difficult. A real favourite is Margaret Mead, who says, never doubt that a small committed group of citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Another one is by Dr. Jane Goodall, who says something along the lines of, I like to think of the whole world as a jigsaw puzzle. When you look at the whole, it can feel overwhelming, but when you break it down and look at work on your piece and know that people all over the world are working on their piece, then that is what will give you hope. And I think that in the climate space, that is particularly apt. When you look at the climate challenge, it is existential and it can feel overwhelming. You can take inspiration by knowing that there are thousands or millions of people who are all working away on their little piece of the jigsaw puzzle, and that collectively we will have a positive impact.
Absolutely. That's a great one to end on. Well, I want to thank you, Tessa, so much for coming onto the pod today. And
Pleasure.
your time is incredibly valuable. You've got millions more folks to reach and millions more rehomed items and food waste to move around the community. What I loved about this episode is that, it shows that technology combined with community, and to your last point, those pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, you can create systems level change. And that's really possible if you focus on, your local community and connecting people back to community. I think that's so powerful. And I think it shows that people can, take part in being part of the solution to one of the biggest challenges of our time, waste. And so from 8 million users sharing meals to preventing emissions equivalent to eliminating 1 billion car miles, which is another amazing stat, the impact you've had speaks for itself. So I just want to thank you so much for what you're doing and for joining us today, Tessa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's my very great pleasure.
Of course. Tell our audience, where can folks learn more and get involved with Olio?
So you can download Olio from your App Store or Google Play. We are at Olio app on most social media channels. That is also our website. And I am Tessa Clarke on LinkedIn.
Nice. Thank you. And this episode has inspired me. I have this tiny little white desk and chair in our spare room, and I've been like, I need to do something with this.
I've just downloaded the app. It.
I know. I just downloaded the app. I'm going to use Olio to rehome it. That is my promise. I'll post it on LinkedIn or something like that. But,
good.
Well, yeah, thank you for that inspiration. And for our listeners, please give us a review, give us a 5-star rating. It helps us bring amazing founders like Tessa onto the show. Thanks, everybody.